Welcome back. You're watching the News Hour. Let's get more on our top story now. And the Foreign Office has announced that the UK will be joining the United States, Canada, Australia and Italy in suspending funding to the UN Relief Agency in Gaza. It comes after claims some of its workers were involved in the October 7th Hamas attacks on Israel. Well, I'm joined now by Mark Regev, who's a senior advisor to the Israeli Prime Minister. Good evening to you, Mr. Regev.
Good evening.
What more can you tell us about the information that Israel shared with the UN that led to exposing these links?
Documented information, clear information, ironclad information that UNRWA staff were involved in that terrible attack on Israeli civilians on October 7th. They were part of the force that stormed the border, that came into Israel, a force, as you know, that burnt people alive, that beheaded, that raped, that massacred people. They were part. Those UNRWA staffers were part of those crimes against humanity. Think about this. People on
it
the
is
UN
extraordinary
payroll.
and serious. I'd like just the question I was trying to get at was I would like more information, because I was reading earlier that my understanding is that Shin Bet and the IDF provided some information. I wanted to understand a little more about how you managed to identify them. I understand there are details about vehicles, and if you're able to share that with Sky News.
So a lot of the information is information that Hamas itself put up. As you know, there have been war criminals in the past who have hidden their war crimes or tried to hide their war crimes, while Hamas went live on social media and posted a lot of the material. So you actually see the faces and the people involved in a lot of the crimes. Then there are people who were killed during the IDF attempt to stop the attack. And then you could identify exactly who they were, and then you know who they worked for and their identity. Then there are people who we captured as part of the fighting, and they are now prisoners. And when you interrogate them and you ask them who have they worked for, we're talking about not hearsay. We're talking about clear, unrefutable evidence that UN-paid staff were involved in crimes against humanity.
Yeah, it is extraordinary, and a reminder to our viewers, these are allegations at the moment. Philippe Lazzarini, the UNRWA chief, has said, or UNRWA chief has said, that they've made the decision to sack some of these staffers to protect the agency's ability to deliver humanitarian assistance. That's going to be pretty hard now, because in reaction, a lot of countries, including the UK, has decided to pause the funding for UNRWA. Do you agree with that?
Yes, and I'll tell you why. Because the October 7th massacre, the involvement of UNRWA staff in the murders, in the massacres, in the rapes, in the beheadings, unfortunately, that's not an aberration. They would like to think, oh, this is just a few bad apples. But there was also an example reported, documented, of UNRWA teachers, that's teachers in UN schools in Gaza, who celebrated the October 7th massacre of Israeli civilians. There's also an example, one of the hostages who was released in November, she reported that she was held hostage, held prisoner in the home of an UNRWA employee. So it's not an aberration.
Mr. Regev, not discounting the utter horror of October the 7th, I think we can both agree it was completely horrific. And not discounting that these allegations are incredibly serious. But there are, if we try to get some perspective, there are around, I understand, about 12 employees that may well have been involved in the October 7th attacks, who should be dealt with correctly through the courts. But UNRWA hires around 13,000 people, crucially working inside Gaza. They are also the main vehicle for transporting that aid, which now the ICJ says it is incumbent on Israel to ensure it gets that aid into Gaza because of the situation there. How else is aid meant to get into Gaza now?
So first of all, can I just take issue with one word? You said you used the word perspective. And I stressed that the incidents we're talking about are not an aberration, they're systematic. And I pointed to other examples. If it was just one example, you could say, well, it's a couple of bad apples in an organization. But no, unfortunately, there's a structural relationship between UNRWA and Hamas that is very, very disturbing and can't just be dismissed by saying a few bad apples. The names we have provided, I'm sorry, I think that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's just the tip of the iceberg.
I get your point on that. Let's just talk about the fact that the ICJ has now said in that ruling that there is a need to deliver aid to desperate Gazans. How is Israel going to ensure that? And have you already started, perhaps?
Yes. This is something that we did before the ICJ decision, and we will do after the ICJ decision. We are committed to facilitating humanitarian aid to reach the people of Gaza. Ultimately, our operation is against the Hamas murderers. It's not against the people of Gaza.
So have the number of trucks gone up going into Gaza?
Well, can I just say the following? UNRWA, which you're talking to me about, has a humanitarian function, but I think by being involved in the political side, by having this relationship with Hamas, they are perverting their own mandate because...
Okay, we've got about 30 seconds left, Mr. Regev. I hear what you said. We've got about 30 seconds left. I wanted to ask you about the hostages, the Israeli hostages held illegally. It's a war crime by Hamas inside Gaza. The ICJ has ordered Hamas to release them. Are you able to open up some kind of negotiation yet again, like you did last time, when we finally saw the good news of some hostages released?
So I hope so. The effort goes on. We're talking to the Americans, to the Egyptians, to the Qatari government. We want to see another round of releases. Like we did in November, we're willing to give a humanitarian pause to allow that to happen. We will do everything we can to have our hostages released. Unfortunately, they're being held by the Hamas killers who don't give a hoot about international law or, frankly, about the ICJ. And we will have to see, but we will embrace all opportunities to see our hostages come home.
OK, thank you so much for bearing with me to try and squeeze in as many of those questions as possible. Mark Regev, good to have you with us tonight. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
We've just got time for some weather for you.